Good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. We're going to get started. My name is Ben Dupuy. I'm a member of the BGR Board of Directors and chair of the Breakfast Briefing Committee. I'm pleased to welcome you to BGR's third breakfast briefing, sponsored by First Horizon Bank. I want to extend our gratitude to WWNO New Orleans Public Radio, which will rebroadcast this event on Tuesday, July 2nd at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. We hope you'll take advantage of the question and answer portion of today's program. It's easy to participate. Follow the instructions at your seats to access the online Q&A forum. For those viewing the program virtually, the QR code will also appear on the screen during the Q&A session. If you prefer to write your question, please hand it to a BGR staff member and include your name if you want to be identified. Following the program, please share your feedback about the event. There are survey forms at your seats that you can complete and give to us, or you can scan the QR code and take the survey on your phone. These surveys help us to improve our breakfast briefings so they're as relevant and informative as possible. Later in the program, we'll show you that code on the screen, or you may refer to the instructions. The best way to stay on top of all BGR events and research is to become a member. BGR is a private, nonprofit, independent research organization dedicated to informed policymaking and the effective use of public resources for the improvement of government in the New Orleans metropolitan area. We regularly engage with our members about our public policy work. BGR values this dialogue, and we appreciate our members' support in amplifying BGR's good government recommendations. If you're not currently a member, visit bgr.org and join the ranks of empowered citizens working to improve local government. We also encourage you to follow BGR on social media. And now, to introduce our topic this morning is Becky Mowbray, BGR's President and CEO.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Ben. I'd like to express our gratitude to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of the BGR Breakfast Briefing Series again this year. First Horizon's support allows BGR to make these events free and open to the public. So it is wonderful to see everyone this morning, so many old friends and new here in the crowd. My name is Becky Mowbray, and I serve as BGR's President and CEO. Put this down. BGR produces research reports that identify solutions to some of the most complex challenges facing our metro area with local government in Jefferson, Orleans, and St. Tammany parishes. Our work enhances government accountability. We also help inform voters with independent, nonpartisan analysis of important local ballot propositions. Early this year, we released property tax dashboards for Orleans, Jefferson, and St. Tammany parishes, which help people to understand how their taxes are set and where this money goes. We also issued a letter to Governor Jeff Landry urging him to keep Louisiana's Coastal Protection and Restoration Agency as a separate entity. This spring, we've also been using our extensive research on the Sewerage and Water Board to advocate for change in its flawed governance structure. And most recently, we wrote a letter to the New Orleans City Council summarizing BGR's guidance on economic development incentives. And this is guidance that is applicable in really any parish in our metro area. We also alerted the public to an undisclosed agreement to change the terms with the New Orleans firefighters' pension and made recommendations about what information should be scrutinized before any changes are contemplated. BGR's breakfast briefings advance our mission by allowing citizens to hear directly from government officials and experts on public policy issues vital to the greater New Orleans area. This is the third of 4 breakfast briefings that we will hold this year. And we will post a replay of this event, a video replay, on bgr.org. Today's topic will focus on the current state of the Vieux Carré, our city's historic French Quarter neighborhood, and the potential resources to improve this New Orleans treasure and surrounding areas prior to Super Bowl 59. Hosting the Super Bowl is a lucrative endeavor with a forecasted $500 million economic impact on its chosen city, and New Orleans is no stranger to hosting this monumental event. In fact, 2025 will mark the 11th time that the NFL has brought the nation's attention to the Crescent City, and we must be prepared to be in the national spotlight again. Not only does the Super Bowl generate millions of dollars, but it offers opportunities for capital and infrastructure improvements to the host city. Already, the Superdome is undergoing renovations, a massive $500 million project that's been underway since 2019. Now, we need to turn our attention to the French Quarter, a popular tourist destination and one of the city's most vital neighborhoods and its surrounding areas. Upgrades to lighting, streets, and pavement, along with touch-ups to our city's many hotels, are needed to make New Orleans both an attractive and safe host city. Here today to delve deeper into this topic are Nathan Chapman, immediately to my right, president of the Vieux Carré Property Owners, Residents, and Associates, also known as VC-PORA. And next is Daniel Hammer, president and CEO of the historic New Orleans Collection, and Michael Hecht, president and CEO of Greater New Orleans, Inc. Nathan Chapman is president of the nonprofit watchdog organization Vieux Carré Property Owners, Residents, and Associates, a role he has held since 2001 and one that he previously held from 2002 to 2008. He is a longtime resident of the French Quarter, and his passion for historic preservation has earned him 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards for volunteerism. In addition to his role at VC-PORA, he is also chair of the Riverfront Neighborhood Alliance, a coalition of neighborhood groups that address common issues. When he's not volunteering, Nathan's, quote, day job is as founder and president of Formidable, a nationwide marketing agency based in New Orleans. Daniel Hammer is also a tireless advocate of historical conservation and currently serves as president and CEO of the Historic New Orleans Collection. His vision is to elevate the museum's role as a top resource for those attracted to New Orleans. As the Historic New Orleans Collection is in the heart of the French Quarter, Daniel is also cognizant of the fact that he needs to be attentive to what's going on in his backyard. He serves as a member of several boards and is a frequent guest lecturer at conferences and symposia. Michael Hecht is president and CEO of Greater New Orleans, Inc., the premier economic development organization for Southeast Louisiana. Michael works tirelessly to realize GNO Inc.'s mission of creating a region with a thriving economy and an excellent quality of life for everyone. Under his expert leadership, GNO Inc. has been named Economic Development Organization of the Year and a top 10 economic development organization in America. Michael's extensive knowledge of economic development within New Orleans and within the region led Governor Jeff Landry to recently tap him to coordinate local preparations for Super Bowl 59, a position for which he is uniquely qualified. During today's presentation, I will be moderating a Q&A session among the panelists. We'll start with a list of curated questions that we'll discuss up here, and then we will turn it over to you and take questions from the audience in a Q&A. To submit a question, please use your phone to scan the QR code on the screen or on the online form at bgr.org/QA, where you can type in your question. Please include your name if you'd like to be identified. I'd like to note that the views expressed in this program are those of our speakers. So please join me in welcoming Nathan, Daniel, and Michael. Thank you. So, thanks again for coming today. Why don't we start with just a foundational question for this discussion? Why does the French Quarter matter to all New Orleanians? And Nathan, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's always a treat when I get to come over to the American sector, so I've been enjoying that. So, historic preservation, I think incorrectly, is often perceived as being an interest of well-to-do white people. And I live in a city that's very diverse, both racially and economically. So in my 30 years of volunteering, I've gone out of my way to talk to people of every economic strata and every race you can think of. And the people in this area are so proud of the French Quarter. It belongs to all of them. They want to see it protected. Virtually without exception, I find that. It's where we were founded, and our heart and soul is there. And so I think it matters on that kind of level to people.
Perfect. Daniel, what do you think?
Thank you also for me as well, and thank you to everyone for being here. I'm excited to see so much engagement and interest in this important topic. I kind of want to piggyback off of what Nathan said and say that I think the French Quarter is essentially a metaphor for New Orleans as people perceive it. And that is true of those of us who live here in New Orleans, who call it home, and is true of the tens of millions, probably really hundreds of millions of people around the world who know New Orleans. I know we've all had the experience of traveling to other places, and people ask you, where are you from? And you tell them New Orleans, and they say something, they know New Orleans. I don't know if I've ever encountered anyone in the world who hadn't ever heard of New Orleans. And so for those people, as well as for us, the French Quarter, I think, serves as a metaphor for the city. And it is often positive, and it's often negative. Some people think of it as a place of great historic and cultural values. Some people think of it as a place of interesting characters. Some people think of it as dirty or dangerous or troubled. And so in any of those versions, the French Quarter is often a picture in people's minds of what New Orleans for them is as well. And in that way, our ability to manage the French Quarter, to make of it the best thing possible, is an opportunity to make of the perception of New Orleans, both for the people who live here and the people who visit here, the best thing possible. And so truly, it's our greatest asset.
Super. Michael?
Great. Thank you, Becky and Ben and everybody. And I agree with Daniel and Nathan on this. I'll answer it to start out in just kind of more economic development terms, the way we think about it and why it's important to everybody. Statistically, up to 90% of all visitors to the region go to the French Quarter. And so, as Daniel said, I don't even know if it's a metaphor. I think it is New Orleans. I think it's taken as a literal representation of everything that we are. I asked ChatGPT last night, and it told me that it generates up to $10 billion of economic impact. That's total spend every year. And I actually looked at the numbers, and I think it wasn't a hallucination. I think it actually is that big of a number. And I think most fundamentally, to the degree that New Orleans is a top civic brand in the world, and we were just voted number 2 for culture in America and number 18 for nightlife in the world, it's because of the French Quarter. So it has an importance to New Orleans that's economically and culturally transcendent, I think.
Terrific. So let's get right to the heart of it. What is your take, and this is a question for all 3 panelists, what is your take on the state of the French Quarter and the most important issues and opportunities it faces today? And Nathan, why don't we start with you? We'll just go down the line again.
Actually, I'd like to quote from a letter Moon Landrieu in 1969 sent to my organization, and he was running for office for mayor then, and he said, Through zoning, I'll work to stop the spread of stores and motels in the quarter because I believe the character of the area requires that it remain residential. The French Quarter is a wonderful tourist attraction just because people live there. The French Quarter is a uniquely human part of the city, and planning for that area must be directed toward keeping it that way. So the good news is that at City Hall, my organization, we win way more issues than we lose. And I appreciate all of the people at City Hall who make that happen. But I'm not sure the spirit is still there like it was back then. You know, right now there's a study that the city is doing about short-term rentals, you know, which you know was a hot topic around the city. There's currently a ban that came during that time around 1969 as the French Quarter was becoming all tourism. You know, if we lift the short-term rental bans in the quarter, that will be the end of the quarter as we know it. One by one, the houses will stop being residential and they'll become places for tourists. And I think that's going to make it not only, you know, a less unbelievable a place where you can't live, but a less place to live. Excuse me, to visit also. I know the BGR loves big epic issues, so I want to put one on the table. Okay. When I moved to New Orleans in the mid-1980s, Mike Early was District C City Council person. He left office in 1990. That was the last City Council person we've had from the East Bank. Now, I'm not putting down current or former council people, but just as a system, the neighborhood where Mike Early lived is no longer part of District C. As the West Bank has grown, we've shrunk the East Bank. And so what happens now is that we elect District C council people based on how good a job they will do to handle the suburban problems of the West Bank, and then we put them in charge of the least suburban neighborhood we have, and arguably the most important one. So I'm hoping we can address how do we represent it, you know, just from a systemic point of view.
Very good. Great observation. On to Daniel.
You know, I think I want to kind of piggyback off of what Nathan was saying. I think that the state of the French Quarter today is one of great opportunity because it remains a very amazingly preserved place of great historic value. And so that's a great advantage for our city. However, it also is on a trajectory that it's been on for a while, and which is accelerating towards a singular usage as a tourist location. And this is really a great risk for the French Quarter because it has always been a place of a great diversity of uses, and its historic value is tied to that fact, that historic fact, that it is a place where many different things have always gone on, a city. It's a little bit more complicated to my mind than just the matter of residents versus tourists. It's really about relevance to locals versus relevance to tourists, and creating of those two groups a singular audience that can coexist together. And so, you know, when you think about the billions of dollars of economic impact and the capacity for residential occupancy, increasing the number of voters who live in the French Quarter is not going to get us a solution to this challenge of figuring out a way to manage the French Quarter effectively so that the economic stakeholders and the residential stakeholders are all served. And so we need to find ways to make the French Quarter relevant to all New Orleanians so that everybody who votes in New Orleans, everybody who puts people into positions of power is making decisions based on the best interests of the French Quarter because it matters to them. And so this is where cultural heritage comes in, because this is something that is of value to everybody, whether you live in a place or you visit a place. Cultural heritage is something that you care about. It's either yours and you care about it for that reason, or it's the reason why you're coming to this historic city in the first place and you want to engage with it. And so we need to invest as a community in ways, in the things that we can, the opportunities that exist to elevate cultural heritage as a predominant player in the French Quarter, and thereby bring about investment spiritual investment of the people who live there that they'll go to the voting booths with, investing in making sure that the French Quarter is, taken care of, and that's, I think, the great challenge and opportunity.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'll keep this brief, Becky. Given the cultural and economic importance of the French Quarter that I think everybody agrees with, the current state of it is inexcusable. Period. We've all go around the world to other cities, whether it's Charleston or Memphis or Cartagena or Casco Viejo or Europe, and we see how these places are maintained. That's a fact, and I'll go. I mean, it's an empirical fact, and I think it does. I get back to this question of relevance, and I do think it's important, Daniel, that people appreciate culture. But as somebody who runs a museum, you know how hard it is to get people to pay for culture, and so I think it gets down to, again, this question of raw political power, and what are the underlying structures. And if you just look at the math, and this gets back to what you're saying, Nathan, okay? There are roughly, 75,000 people in District C. I don't know the exact number, but it's about a fifth of whatever, the city is. So that would mean that the French Quarter is, 2 to 3%. So if $1 comes down, where is it going to go? This is raw political power. And then look at it on a citywide basis in a city of 380,000 people. If you've got 2,000 to 3,000 people, you're talking about less than a percentage point. And until we address that structural incentive or disincentive for investment, I think it's going to be difficult to get the level of attention, financial or otherwise, that we want.
All right, we've got a lot on the table here with political questions and population questions and things. Let's drill down on this a little bit more. Daniel and Nathan, where do you see the tensions in ensuring that the community benefits from the French Quarter as both a tourist destination and as a neighborhood? And to mix it up a little bit, Daniel, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that the big tension is this kind of idea of the competition between those two groups, tourists and locals, and that, the current state of things in New Orleans, in my perception, is that you are perceived as either serving one or the other. You're doing something to benefit tourists, or you're doing something to benefit locals. And if you're doing something to benefit locals, whatever you're doing is not in the French Quarter. And so, we need to change that approach. We need to change that perception of things. And so, as a museum director, to my mind, the most near at hand and greatest opportunity to do that is through increasing museum activity in the French Quarter, because museums do serve both audiences. Museums aren't just places that tourists come, they're also places that school groups come to. Our visitors are not just our tourists, they're also our students, our families, it's all of those things. And so by creating in the French Quarter, a place where a significant portion of the people who are in it are there for the purposes of engaging with museums, this is our greatest opportunity to overcome this issue of perceiving the tourists and the locals as two completely separate groups that need to be served in different ways. And I think that if we can get over that, we as a city that depends on tourism can take a big step forward.
Really interesting idea. Nathan?
Yeah, when you live in the French Quarter, you're proud of it, and we love our visitors, and we love showing it off. And many times I've had somebody looking at my house, and we start talking about it, and I invite them into the courtyard or even into the house. It's a great joy to live there and to be able to share it with other people. But we have more visitors in the French Quarter than the country of Ireland. So sometimes there's just too many people, too much activity around alcohol. I love what Daniel is preaching. Let's raise it by spreading it with the rest of the city, and more people doing more cultural things, and higher income, all of that. Part of the tension becomes, because we're so burdened with all of that, other neighborhoods say, well, why does the French Quarter get all the attention, or the special rules like no short-term rentals? And so The answer is, though, not that we protect the French Quarter less, but we protect our other neighborhoods more. I think that would benefit New Orleans as a whole.
Okay.
I'd just like
wanna
to,
add? Sure.
to add something that is that, think about Mardi Gras. I don't know how many millions of people come to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. Michael could tell us, I'm sure. But, Mardi Gras is a huge tourist attraction. And yet, I don't think any of us New Orleanians feel that Mardi Gras isn't ours. It's something that we all hold dear as one of our great identity touchstones. And so how is that possible? And it's because, we intentionally put a lot into Mardi Gras. We participate in clubs and organizations. We're members of crews. We go out and we do it. And so the idea, if anyone out there is thinking that the idea that the French Quarter could be a place of significance for New Orleanians is far-fetched because it's for tourists, just look at Mardi Gras.
Very good. The next question is to all three, and why don't we start at the far end with Michael on this one. Is the French Quarter over-regulated or under-regulated? Why? And in which areas would you make changes?
No, it's just under-enforced. I mean, the regulations are fine. I mean, I didn't check this morning. I ran out of time, but I don't think it's legal to have a python around your neck walking around in public spaces. I think that's if you could, Jude, if you could check on that, but I think that that's a wildlife and fisheries violation. I don't think that you're allowed to go and set up a table and pour shots down people's throats without paying taxes on it. That's Department of Revenue regulation. I don't think you're allowed to graffiti other people's property. That's a code enforcement violation. And I don't think human trafficking is legal. Or selling illicit drugs. And so it's not a regulation issue in a lot of cases. It's just a question of consistent and even enforcement, and that's a question of resources and political will. And that's why I'm going to keep coming back to this first principles issue of political will and why it doesn't exist. So in this case, again, it's a question of political will, not regulations.
Yeah, I would add, I totally agree with that answer. And, we need to fund our agencies. Remember, my day job is in marketing, so this is our most famous brand and probably our most important product, and we need to protect it and invest in it. And so with our commissions, we're constantly begging for more budget so there'll be more people. Sometimes it's malfeasance. Recently there was a bar that opened up, and it's like, wait, this permit said it was going to be a restaurant, and we got the file pulled on it, and in the last inspection, you can see the photos were taken from the inspector's car. You can see the rear view mirror in it. I'm sorry. There you go. Unfortunately not. So we just need to do a better job because so much depends on it.
Daniel.
Yeah, I will third this. Absolutely, the French Quarter needs greater enforcement. It's not under-regulated. In fact, I would like to point out that the regulations that exist in the French Quarter are good. There are good regulations, and the Historic New Orleans Collection, our founders purchased the buildings that we originally occupied as a museum in 1938. That's 2 years after the Vieux Carré Commission was created. So everything we have done as an organization from before our organization existed, through the opening as a museum in the early 1970s, through our expansion in the 1990s and early 2000s to the present day, we have a major capital project on our hands to renovate a group of 7 buildings on Royal Street. These are complicated, big projects. All of them take place under the regulations that exist in the French Quarter, and all of them have been successful. The regulations are not the problem. The problem, now there is a major enforcement problem, like Michael and Nathan have said, that is absolutely, and that's the low-hanging fruit that we need to seize and we need to do something about as a community. But, going back to the regulations, people are, there's a lack of coordination, and there is a lack of incentivization for people who want to do good work in the French Quarter to do it. We have the advantage of historical knowledge. We can engage with the process, we know how to do it, and we work with great success with the Vieux Carré Commission and with the State Historic Preservation Office and with all of these other things. That's possible for anybody. You know, we don't get any special treatment. We just know how to do it. We take the time and we do it according to the best possible practice, and we have great success. But, you know, that's not easy to understand how to do. I admire the Vieux Carré Commission. I saw Brian Block earlier for the efforts that they undertake to educate the public about how to work successfully with them. But, you know, they're very limited. It's a matter of we need to invest in our regulations, because there's a great opportunity to preserve historic value through them. But we need to invest in them and make them usable for folks and not a barrier for folks.
And Daniel, just to elaborate, what were you referring to when you mentioned incentives in that for other players in the French Quarter, that you feel like the incentives aren't where they should be?
Well, I don't want to get out of my lane,
Okay.
because I don't know about things out of my lane, but I do think that our community requires more creativity when it comes to figuring out how to take advantage of our assets for our own improvement in the French Quarter. You know, I think we will get into this, I'm sure, in our conversation, but you know, the French Quarter is underutilized by the community. There's a lot of space, there's a lot of built space in the French Quarter that we just aren't using. Let's get creative. Someone get creative. Again, this isn't my lane, but, you know, how can we bring about good development of that underutilized space? And so I think, you know, that's what I think. What are the opportunities to incentivize people to do good things?
Yeah, and I think that actually brings a point, sorry to jump on this, but I think that Daniel raises a point, is that in some cases it's not under-regulation, but it's over-regulation or the wrong type of regulation. So if you walk down Charters or Royal and you look up and you see all the empty spaces above where residents could be living, you've got to ask, what are the disincentives that are preventing owners from developing those as condominiums or apartments? And there's usually a regulation that is preventing it. It might be that fire safety. I'm not saying that life safety isn't important, but that the way it's structured takes up too much of the first floor retail. So the owner says it's not worth it. Or it might be that in order to get enough power up to the top apartments, Entergy requires you to put in a massive unit, and it has to be on the sidewalk, taking up some of your sidewalk frontage. So I think in all of these cases where you say, you know, why are we not getting the desired outcome, it's really critical to just kind of keep peeling the onion till you get to that stinky core that says, why are the normal incentives for people, right, not working here? And there's usually, or it's oftentimes, a zoning regulation that was done probably with the best of intentions, which is having a perverse or stagnating effect.
Great. And Michael, I also wanted to pick up on something you said in your first round answer. You rattled off a plethora of agencies, you know, local and state and things that have a stake in the French Quarter. What can be done to have better coordination and focus so that there is enforcement?
So I think that we're seeing that the Super Bowl has been a really exciting forcing function for us. And what I can tell you in complete honesty is that the level of excitement and cooperation that we have seen at every level, so this is the state, this is the city, at every level from Gilbert Montano and Joe Threat on down, from the Sewer and Water Board, Gasson and Steve Nelson, has been extraordinary. And so I think what that says is, and I was actually saying this to Nell when we were speaking before, it's both encouraging because we're getting things done, and you can just walk outside on Poydras Street and see what's getting done. And it's actually been pretty easy, right? And so what that says is that it's exciting because it just takes a little bit of coordination and, for lack of a better way to say it, positive energy. But on the flip side, it also is a bit discouraging because you say, if it's so darn easy, why aren't we always, you know, doing this? So when I was coming over here this morning and I was panicked, I called my lifeline, who's Richard Campanella, who's definitely the smartest person in the room, even when he's not in the room. And so I'm going to paraphrase him at risk of, I'll say these are my opinions and not Richard's, because he had to sanction me to say these. But I said, Richard, what do we do? And he said, well, I'm not saying that the French Quarter should be turned into a park, a state park. That's been something that's been floated in. I'm just going to hazard that most people here would not think that that's necessarily the right answer. However, he did say this. The Vieux Carré Commission, Nathan, was set up in 1936 or 37? But 36, by the state to demonstrate the state's validation or interest in the French Quarter. And what we're seeing now with the Super Bowl, and frankly, we've seen it now with the governor and a few other things, with Troop NOLA, with the improvements to the Sewer and Water Board, that the state, because of the different power dynamics, is able to have an influence and an impact that maybe it's difficult to have at the local level because of the things that we've been talking about. And so what the conversation I was having with Richard is maybe there's a way for the state to set up structures that encourage this type of cooperation, kind of facsimiles of the financial and reputational exigency of the Super Bowl on a regular basis to kind of create this forcing function going forward. So I thought it was interesting that that's where Richard went on this.
Awesome.
Could I just
Okay, sure.
piggyback on that for a second? I think that is, I think it's really interesting to think about the fact that the Super Bowl is providing the motivation to consider these opportunities. And I just, in my panic this morning, I went to the AAM website, the American Alliance of Museums, and reviewed their, factoids about museums and their impact on economies and on societies. And, the numbers of people who engage with museum activity in our country surpasses the number of people who go to sporting events on an annual basis by literally hundreds of millions of people. And so, imagine New Orleans as the premier museum destination in the country, and understand that that would mean this type of motivation of our local regulators, our city government, our state government, a constant source of motivation to make the necessary investments for our community to thrive.
Wonderful.
So I think I'm impressed with what the city is planning to do in terms of infrastructure. They're going to repave a bunch of streets and sidewalks. It's a little like your parents are coming to visit and you're going to clean up, right? So it's good that happens, but even better if you live that way. And so we do have a French Quarter Management District, which has representatives of both residents and businesses. They have gotten some money from the state, and they're doing some infrastructure things also. So if we can continue to fund that, we do need to do this on an ongoing basis.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll turn in just a few moments to the Super Bowl, but for now, I'd like to talk a little bit about population and property values. The French Quarter has lost more than a quarter of its population in the last 2 decades. As we're showing a slide, it went from 4,176 people, according to the 2000 census, to just over 3,000 people in 2022. And meanwhile, in the last 5 years, the median home value in the French Quarter has risen by nearly 40%. What are the implications of these statistics?
So we can go even farther back. In 1940, it was about 11,000 people, So a lot of it has to do with the property values have risen. Some cultural, right? We don't have those big Italian families like we used to. But mostly it's the property values going up, and so people decide this is not a place for families, it's for empty nesters who have more money and don't have to worry about the kids, and et cetera, et cetera. So the buildings have never been in better shape, because there's all this money, but we are losing a richness to the culture by it not being a full, strata of people living there. So it is a concern.
Interesting. Dan?
I would like to see these numbers with also shown with information about square footage, how usage of square feet of developed real estate. And I believe that what these numbers probably indicate is that there's a lot of vacant buildings, there's a lot of underutilized real estate. And, you know, it's interesting because in the mid-20th century, the big preservation challenge in the French Quarter was demolition by neglect. So you had a lot of buildings that were totally vacant and were owned by absentee owners, and people who cared about the preservation of the French Quarter, their big challenge was finding these owners and connecting with them and figuring out how to buy the property. And so, you know, a resource at the Historic New Orleans Collection, the Vieux Carré survey, which we still maintain and is still a very important research tool in the French Quarter, you know, its origin is in compiling the chains of title for all the French Quarter buildings so that it would be easier for people to go down the route of identifying ownership so that they could buy buildings. You know, there's no longer you know, mystery buildings in the French Quarter in a significant way where they're sitting there empty and decrepit and nobody knows who owns them. Yet, I do believe that this group of statistics about the reduction in population, residential population, probably does indicate a loss over time in the use of the buildings, of the built environment in the French Quarter, and that's very problematic.
Yeah, I think this is simply, you know, a Jane Jacobs, you know, bad scenario because you've got a loss of density, a loss of mixed income, and a loss of mixed use. And those are the things that give urban neighborhoods their vitality, the density and the mixes of people and uses. Mm-hmm. So if we want to maintain the vitality, the energy, really the historic character of the French Quarter, going back to the Spanish and the French, then it's important that, again, we reverse those disincentives for living there because it's what makes the French Quarter special.
Very good. Okay. To all three of you, French residents and businesses have lodged many complaints about conditions in the French Quarter. This slide up on our screen now shows a map of 311 complaints filed since the start of 2023. How can we use the Super Bowl to spur systemic and positive change in the French Quarter? And what will it take to sustain that effort after the game is over? What suggestions do you all have for city and state officials? Michael, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so in the Super Bowl, we have, at this point, our punch list is, Leo, John, what's it up to, about 540 items? Okay, about that. So only about 540 items to do over the next 227 days. So we're in pretty good shape. Of those items, roughly a third of them are in the French Quarter, I believe, so a lot of them. And as you can see, the map of the 311 calls is basically the street grid of the French Quarter, so it maps almost perfectly. The good news is that we're going to get a lot of these done. It's going to be between probably $10 and $15 million. There are lighting contracts, there are roadway repairs, there are sidewalk repairs, both cement and specialty paving. There's graffiti abatement. One of the ones that's most interesting is that the sanitation contract is coming up for bid, and a new sanitation company could be in there the day before Christmas, which would give them about a month to, I don't know, like make it smell like lemons again, just for, I don't know, right. You know, I'm not saying we'll have to unbutton our shirts halfway, but I'm saying if that helps, let's get behind this thing. And I think, Becky, to your question about how we make it go forward, we've talked a lot about some structural stuff and some stuff that might be very difficult to do. And, you know, I've had some suggestions that we need to think about the councilmanic districts, and that really District C is problematic because it's going to naturally serve the West Bank, as it should. And maybe you have to look at what the NFL is calling the clean zone, which is basically the expressway down to Esplanade and then Claiborne down to the river. and say, that really is an area that is a tourist zone now. That is, and maybe that needs to be, its own council zone. Maybe we kind of reconfigure in a way that creates more density of people with like-minded issues, right, or similar issues. But there's something actually more basic. The main reason why we are getting things done for the Super Bowl is just that we're getting people in the room and we're giving them bad coffee in styrofoam cups and we're sitting there until it gets done. There's just a coordinating and expediting function that wasn't necessarily happening before between dozens of organizations, FQMD and DDD and DPW and code enforcement in the state. And so I think one of the things I might suggest going forward is that we retain this structure of the Super Bowl, which is this, that we meet every week and that we discuss the issues and we act on them. Yep.
I vote yes for that, and and I'll just return to what I was saying earlier about what's the motivation for doing that, and so it's the what's the opportunity to maintain the motivation to keep that type of engagement going after the Super Bowl, and it's in the even greater economic development opportunities that museums and cultural institutions offer. And think about the downtown and broader all in total New Orleans resources as it relates to this. This is an incredible museum city. Right across Canal Street from the French Quarter, you have one of the country's most visited museums, the World War II Museum. You have directly adjacent to that other great museums, the Ogden, the CAC. On the way to the French Quarter, you've got the Sazerac House and other museum attractions. You have to cross Canal Street, you have to cross the 100 block, you have to get into the Vieux Carré, and then you've got another world of great museums that we're building capacity to host as many visitors as the World War II Museum. And so it's right there. The fruit is right there for us to take. We just need to overcome these challenges. And so what Michael's describing, I think, is super important, and we have to perceive the opportunity that museum and intentional cultural engagement in downtown New Orleans, rooted in the French Quarter, offers us to achieve that. I want to also circle back to your original question and say, walkability is such an important part of this. So, accessibility and walkability. The French Quarter has to be a place, as well as downtown, that people can comfortably walk from place to place in. And, so we got to deal with the sidewalks, and we got to get the garbage cans out of the way. I can't tell you, every day I go out and I see people stepping off of the sidewalk onto the street to get around a giant garbage can. And, it's all well and good if you can do that easily, but a lot of people can't. Right. And it becomes a real barrier to the positive experience that we want to have in the engagement. If I want to hop
in there, because you said something that triggered something, and I always want to say this. This issue of walkability, which is a much better word than drinkability, which is not a real word, is we do at some point have to revisit this issue of when streets in the real tourist parts of the French Quarter should have limited car access. And I know that for some reason that's a contentious issue, but here's the reality. And look, I'm married to a Danish woman. Copenhagen has the longest pedestrian shopping street in Europe. Throw it. It's miles long. It drives, you get millions of visitors. The shop owners love it. People live there. We have to think about this walkability issue, not just in terms of the sidewalks, but at what times of the day should Bourbon Street, as the most extreme, but Royal Charters, others, be really for a walkable experience and allow residents to get in, allow deliveries to get in. But I'm not sure what cars add to the French Quarter at peak times. That's my opinion. Hate me, but I said that for my wife.
Okay. Michael, why don't we stay with you for a moment? Can you tell us more about your vision for the Super Bowl 59 preparations, and what investments are being planned in the French Quarter to help realize that vision?
So I think we kind of went through a lot of the things. It's what you would expect. I think that there are really three goals for the Super Bowl. One is is just to do a good job with it. That's the basics. That's literally the filling in the potholes. The second one, which I'm actually much more interested in, is presenting an image of New Orleans and Louisiana to the world that transcends the usual cliches and tropes, which are, unfortunately those that are associated with the first few blocks of Bourbon Street, right? And then there's an ulterior motive here, which is that we're trying to do an excellent job for the NFL because we want to get the next Super Bowl, which is becoming harder and harder because every time somebody builds a $2 billion stadium, even if it's in Minnesota, they get a Super Bowl. By the way, I talked to the people that did the Minnesota Super Bowl. I'm like, how did you pull off a Super Bowl in Minnesota in February? And they said, we embraced it. We called the Super Bowl Bold North, and we met everybody at the airport and gave them mittens. So, so that's what we're up against. So those are the three goals. It's about doing good today, but preparing for tomorrow. And I'm sorry, the last thing is we're also trying to create value for the residents of New Orleans that last for years. As we do these drive-arounds and look at areas that need to be fixed up for the Super Bowl, one of the interesting things is you can see areas or streets, for example, that need to be fixed because the last time they were fixed was in 1984 for the World's Fair. Which one, it's strange that it's been 40 years, but two, it lets you know that you can do things that have decade-long benefit.
Great. One more question before we turn to the many audience questions that are coming in. This is a question for Nathan and Daniel. Crime is often top of mind for residents, businesses, local and out-of-town visitors. We've got a slide up of the City Council's crime dashboard, which shows that total NOPD calls for service in the French Quarter have now rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. But at the same time, police presence has also increased in the French Quarter with NOPD overtime officers that are funded by the quarter sales tax, Orleans Parish Sheriff's deputies in the upper quarter funded by New Orleans and Company, and most recently the arrival of the Louisiana State Police's troop NOLA. Have you seen an improvement in public safety in the French Quarter, and what else must be addressed?
Yeah, I do. I think it's safe. I feel safe there. When there is a crime, it makes news more easily, so it gets hyper-focused. Most of the crime is around Bourbon Street or on the edges, or people who look vulnerable because they've been drinking too much, on side streets, and all of a sudden they look like an easy mark. The best crime prevention program we have is people living there. Recently, next to my house, I saw people coming and going, and it just didn't feel right. And I called the owners and I said, "Are y'all renting out now that building to somebody?" They said, "No. Somebody had broken in, was camped out." Because I live there, I realized something's not right, and I took it upon myself to find out. So it will be good for tourism if we have people living there as crime prevention.
Daniel?
I'd just like to say that I appreciate Chief Kirkpatrick and her interest and engagement in the French Quarter. She came to visit us at the collection not long after she started. She met there not just with us, but with the other members of a group, the French Quarter Museum Association, which we have, and so that includes, Father Pat from the St. Louis Cathedral and Ben Dupuy from the Louisiana State Museum and Museum Foundation. Beauregard Kai's house, Herman Grimma House, New Orleans Pharmacy Museum. And so, she showed a great interest in what we're doing, understands that the French Quarter is a place for New Orleanians and for families. And, so I appreciate the police department and law enforcement's investment in the French Quarter. We need to tell them as a community that that's where they need to put their resources because it's important to us. And so I think that there is movement in the right direction, and that's good. And then, just kind of seconding Nathan, I've been working in the French Quarter every day for almost 20 years, and I have 150 colleagues who do the same thing, and I think we all feel safe. I think things are looking up.
Okay, excellent.
I have one more thing to say, though, which is that, there's a lot of peripheral stuff around the French Quarter where people who are in the French Quarter also are. So people park outside of the French Quarter and then they walk into the French Quarter. So particularly people who work in the French Quarter. And this is something we need to pay attention to. This is very important. Those parking lots need to be safe. And that experience of walking from Rampart Street to Royal Street needs to be a safe experience.
Yeah, okay. As is always the case, we have more excellent questions from our engaged audience at breakfast briefings than we do have time, but I'll try to hit a variety of questions that have come in. What are your thoughts about the plan for the Crescent Park extension into the French Quarter riverfront, connecting downriver neighborhoods to the quarter and giving more green and community space for residents? Is it a risk of bringing more tourist activity as opposed to a space for residents? And I'll let any of you decide to tackle that one.
We're supportive of it, which is interesting. My first big volunteer effort with VC Pora was when there was a big tourist attraction proposed for the foot of Esplanade, and we're like, no, we have enough concentration here. We just want a park with massive views of the Mississippi River. That's enough. And for the most part, that's what we're going to get if they stick with the plan. So I think this is what we've been waiting for.
Okay. We've got several questions on this subject. On July 4th, Louisiana will allow anyone over age 18 the ability to carry a concealed gun without a permit. What effect do you expect this to have on safety in the French Quarter?
So, I'll hop on that one. So, as the father of an 18-year-old boy, yeah, it's lousy legislation. We tried to have it scaled back to the original legislation, which is that you need to be 21 and have a permit to conceal carry. The main problem here is that previous language allowed cops to do what's called a Terry stop, which means it gave them constitutional right to stop you if you have a bulge in your jacket and see if you had a permit to carry. So there was within the consent decree, ability for an officer to stop somebody who looks suspicious. The fear is that the new law takes that away, makes it harder to stop somebody who is potentially going to do something wrong. Now, when I talk to officers and experts, there's some sense that there'll be ways to work around this because there is language about the proper way you have to be carrying a firearm. And so I imagine that our good men and women will figure a way around this, but I can say without hesitation, I don't think that it helps. And that's all due respect to my 18-year-old son.
Can I just also say, you know, our museum, we don't allow firearms in our museum. This is standard operating procedure in museums. You know, I'll go try to find a museum anywhere where they let you bring in a gun. It's, you know, it's just not the way it is. So why are we asking our private businesses to do something to enforce a safety mechanism when we should be doing it in the public space in a place like the French Quarter? You know, that's the other way to look at the question. Why allow concealed carry in the French Quarter when it sets up all of these challenges to safety and law enforcement?
I think every place should be as safe as the state capitol in Baton Rouge, where you're not allowed to bring a gun in, but...
A couple of you mentioned the 100 block of the French Quarter in some of your answers. The 100 block of the French Quarter has been problematic for many years with certain uses, its appearance, and safety issues. The zoning of the French Quarter, the official boundaries, don't start till the 200 block, and the 100 block is treated separately from the rest of the French Quarter, and it's part of, I guess, the downtown development district. To what extent does this separate status make it more difficult to address problems? And would this situation improve if the 100 block of the streets that cross Canal were considered part of the Vieux Carré?
Well, you know, it's a totally arbitrary jurisdictional line that needs to be traversed by us. And I think there's a lot of will to do that. And, you know, I know that the Downtown Development District has some really positive ideas and programs in place to do great placemaking in preparation for the Super Bowl and beyond. And let's bring that into the quarter. Let's turn this barrier into a place of transition, a traversable place. So I think the answer is probably yes, it is a barrier, and we need to tackle that challenge because it's really important that we can create a walkable, positive walkable experience between downtown and the French Quarter. That's a really key part of our future success.
We're doing a lot of stuff with analogies and metaphors here, so let me give one that I think is perfect here. I'm looking to Chelsea for validation. Having the DDD manage the 100 block and then the French Quarter manage everything, it makes about as much sense as having DPW manage the catch basins and the small pipes, and then the Sewer and Water Board manage the big pipes and pumping to the river. Nobody would ever design it, this way. So they should be combined, because obviously that is your first experience into the French Quarter. That being said, Davon and the DDD do have a program that Daniel was talking about. It's called the Bourbon Street Gateway Program. We're going to get it funded for the Super Bowl, and it's going to clean it up. It's going to be beautification, facade improvements, that type of thing. And so hopefully, regardless of this disjointed nature, we'll have at least a better experience soon.
Great. We are about out of time, so I'm just going to squeeze in one more question. Where did the ball drop after the last Super Bowl to keep all this engagement in place after the 2013 game? As we are discussing today, what can we do not to lose the trajectory this time, and what can we do to make many of the ideas that you guys have been talking about happen and make them sustainable?
We need to identify the opportunity to keep the motivation going. The Super Bowl is a great motivator. It's working. Thank you, Michael. But let's keep it going. What's the opportunity? And it's museums. And so if we can seize on that opportunity to create a constant source of motivation, economic development motivation for our community, great things ahead.
Very good. I'm going to declare right now that BGR is going to do its part in this, in that we will send out an email sometime soon after this event, kind of recapping many of the items that you guys raised, and so hopefully it'll be an idea list for a to-do list or a consideration list, so that we can keep the energy going on all this.
Can I ask one request to the audience? We're crowdsourcing a lot of the need for improvements. One, to make sure that we include everybody, but also because once people start repeating about the same potholes, we know that our list is getting exhaustive. It's just superbowl@gnoinc.org. So if there's a particular thing, a particular lamppost that really is bothering you, take a quick picture and email it to us at superbowl@gnoinc.org, and we'll make sure that it's on our list.
Terrific. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for questions. Thank you, Nathan, Daniel, and Michael, for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it. And thanks again to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of the breakfast briefings, and thanks to all of you for being with us this morning. Please remember to complete your survey. It really helps us in refining and planning these events going forward. You can use the QR code to take the survey on your phone, or fill out the paper survey form at your seat. A recording of today's BGR breakfast briefing will be available on our website at bgr.org. It will also be rebroadcast on WWNO New Orleans Public Radio on Tuesday, July 2nd at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. We hope this event has been informative and that we will see you again at future BGR events. Watch for a new round of research reports in the coming months. Follow us on social media. Have a great day and happy summer. Thanks.